As I currently speak, Arsenal Football Club have experienced their worst start to a Premier League season in over 46 years. A fifth consecutive season of failing to be among the Premier League's top 4 teams. And yet, this is the new normal for Arsenal Football Club.
Arsenal FC has been one of the biggest clubs in England and a member of the famous Big Six of the English Premier League, along with Manchester United, Liverpool, Chelsea, Tottenham and Manchester City. We find a club that about 10 to 15 years ago was one of the best teams in Europe, but has progressively lost a lot of their power and relevance in the game. Although the history of Arsenal is rich and has a considerable list of sporting successes before the arrival of Arsene Wenger, the best period of the club's history is considered to be under the Frenchman's tenure, mainly during his first year with the Gunners. From 1986 until the mid-90s, Arsenal was coached by George Graham, former Scottish player of the Gunners during his days as a footballer, and someone who has had a successful period as manager where he managed to win several titles. His team included club legends such as David Seaman, Lee Dixon, Tony Adams, Ian Wright and Kevin Campbell. The team style of play was very similar to the classic style which English football is associated with. Many of the strengths are focused on physicality, intensity and competitiveness. However, as time went on, the playing style that gave the Gunners so much success began to become predictable and boring, and this ended with the departure of Graham. Since 1983, David Dean was the vice chairman and co-owner of Arsenal, who bought shares with the club until he became the majority partner in the institution in 1991. Dean was passionate about Arsenal and always prioritised the growth of the club, even investing their own money despite knowing he was not going to get it back. In 1989, during a match at Highbury, Dean was informed that the AS Monaco manager Arsene Wenger was in the stands watching the game. Dean came over at half-time to welcome him and to get to know the Frenchman a bit, since he always had an interest in learning about football in other countries. There began the relationship between Dean and Wenger. After the departure of Graham, the club found itself in a turbulent period, and Dean decided to bet on the person who had become a friend. This is how in 1996, Arsene Wenger became the manager of Arsenal, and thus would begin an era of success for the club through some changes and new ideas that the Frenchman brought to the Gunners. Wenger changed the way Arsenal trained by taking a more science-based approach, rather than the classic training methods at that time, which is a much more common way of training nowadays. Other very noticeable changes was nutrition, as the players consumed chocolate, hamburgers and alcohol, and Wenger, based on what we had learned in Japan, built a diet based on fish and vegetables for them. The team's way of playing also changed drastically, as Arsenal went from a defensive, seeking a 1-0 victory type of team, to playing possession football with a lot of passing, attacking, a more entertaining style of football that has become the hallmark and identity of the club over the years. This change in style of play had a direct impact on the way the club made signings, since it was very difficult to change the mentality of already established players and of those who are at an advanced age. So Wenger chose to look for young players with the potential to coach them with his philosophy. In this sense, one of the very first signings under Wenger was Patrick Vieira, who funny enough arrived at the club a few weeks before the manager himself. His signing was recommended by Wenger through David Dean. Vieira was 20 years old. He was a semi-unknown player in England and he came from AC Milan, where he only got to play a couple of games with the Italian side. Following that mentality of signing younger players, Wenger signed players like Thierry Henry, Cesc Fabregas, Nicolas Anelka, Kolo Touré, Robert Perez, Robin van Persie and Theo Walcott, just to name a few who had a great impact on the club. This signing philosophy allowed the club to make significant profits due to the fact that most of these players had relatively low costs, as they were young, underdeveloped players. Since Wenger's arrival, the club had a progressive growth that ended up taking them to what would be the highest point in the club's history. In 2003 to 2004 season, Arsenal managed to win the English Premier League undefeated, an unrepeatable milestone to date. Lehmann, Lauren, Campbell, Touré, Cole, Gilberto Silva, Vieira, Perez, Lundberg, Bergkamp, Henry, these are all players that have gone down in history as club legends. At that time, Arsenal was at the top of English football, and this was probably the peak of their reputation as a world-class football club. Not only this, but they practiced the most beautiful and entertaining style of play. They began the construction of their new stadium to replace Highbury, a project that was in progress since the arrival of the Frenchman to the club, but for bureaucratic reasons had not been allowed to start until 2004. In 2006, the Emirates Stadium was open with a capacity of 60,704 spectators, almost twice as Highbury, and a total estimated cost of 390 million. The old Highbury ground became an apartment complex which required a bank loan in 2008 to be able to carry out. The construction of Emirates Stadium forced Arsenal to go into debt at the time, and at the same time Asia to catch up with the club's main stars. Financial difficulties also arose, and the club struggled to pay the hefty contracts of these players. Between 2005 and 2007, Vieira, Henry, Perez, Campbell, Cole and Lombard left Arsenal, each one in particular stances, but with a point in common. The club was unable to match the contractual offers of other clubs and needed money to pay for the stadium. This is how the team of the Invincibles began to disappear and the fall of Arsenal began. In 2007, this situation led David Dein to consider accepting the help of a foreign investor who would contribute fresh money to the club to alleviate the strained financial situation. The rest of the board of the club rejected Dein's idea, and he presented his resignation from the position that he had held since 1983. Likewise, he sold the shares he owned in the club. The departure of Dein was not taken well by the players, staff, club legends or by Wenger himself, who at the time came to consider resigning from his position as a sign of support for Dein. However, the former chairman asked the Frenchman to stay in the club to avoid further damage. From this point on, Arsenal entered a period of inconsistency on and off the pitch. It was in 2007 where Stan Kroenke appeared for the first time, an American millionaire who through his company Kroenke Sports and Entertainment owns a group of franchises and different sports. The most well known is the Denver Nuggets of the NBA and the Colorado Rapids of the MLS. At that time, Kroenke bought 9.9% of the club's shares. Red and White Holdings also appeared, being owned by billionaires Alisher Osmanov and Farhad Moshe, who were being advised by Dein and were ones who had acquired the latter's shares. Over the years, Kroenke continued to buy shares in the club from other members of the board until he became a majority shareholder of the club by 2011. The team was constantly forced to sell their best players and tried to replace them with low-cost transfers to face the payment of the Emirates, and at the same time tried to stay competitive. However, the club's horizon was no longer as clear as in the past due to mixed ideas between three parties: Wenger, the board and Kroenke. On a football level, Arsenal's decline wasn't something that happened overnight, but rather a natural, slow crumbling of an empire. We can see this in the first couple of years when the club was at the Emirates Stadium, specifically from 2006 to 2011, while the club wasn't a regular challenger for trophies at the time. They were qualifying somewhat comfortably to the Champions League, getting some decent runs in there. In 2009 they even got to the semi-final. Despite this, the football was still enjoyable and it was a bit of a crutch that Arsenal fans leant on. Arsenal was slowly declining, but Wenger still managed to add some quality football to the squad, and players like Cesc Fabregas, Robin van Persie, Samir Nasri and Rosicky were performing quite well, maintaining the Gunners' status as one of the most appealing sides in football around those years. But it was starting to look like a far cry from the successes of the teams of the early 2000s. Around the mid-2010s, Arsenal were already considered somewhat as a joke club, to which their entire existence was centered around finishing fourth and qualifying for the Champions League to get eliminated in the round of 16. A lot of their key players such as Fabregas or Samir Nasri had moved on to bigger clubs to achieve the successes they had failed to get at Arsenal, which was another dent in the Gunners' status. But the signing that was the final nail in the coffin and cemented Arsenal's place as non-title contenders was Robin van Persie's signing to Manchester United. He was Arsenal's best player, and it was competitive suicide to let him leave to Arsenal's greatest rivals, as at the time Man United was a great squad, but missing a killer striker. He was the league's top scorer in the next season and won Man U the league title. A guard of honour celebrating Man United's success was held at the Emirates Stadium, where Van Persie was applauded by his former teammates, displaying Arsenal's inferiority to their rivals, not only competitively but figuratively also. The club had declined considerably and the style of play had become stale. The club no longer had any clear direction, despite the fact they were slowly investing in signings once again. An example of this loss of direction can be seen in the signing of German Mesut Ozil, who was signed for around 44 million from Real Madrid and signed a contract with a salary of £350,000 per week. His performance declined throughout the 8 years he was at the Gunners, to the point of not playing in the last season with the London club. Ozil was a very good example of Arsenal's decline. He was a statement that quickly fell apart after some really good first months at Arsenal. Sure, the German had some good moments from time to time, but the mentality and the environment of the club did not help or inspire him to help Arsenal to great victories. This can be the same about signings like Olivier Giroud, Alexis Sanchez, Peter Cech, or even Mustafi, who were highly regarded when they got to Arsenal. However, their growth as players stagnated or declined. It was during 2013 to 2018, the last years of Wenger's reign, where Arsenal would win the FA Cup and a couple of Community Shields, but always leaving a sense of underachievement because they were constantly getting pummeled in the Champions League by the likes of Barcelona and Bayern Munich, constantly reminding their fans just how far away they were from Europe's elite. In addition to this, they always failed to make a proper title challenge in the Premier League. By the time Arsenal failed to qualify for the Champions League in the 2017-18 season, it was game over for Wenger and left a lot of criticism with a lot of fans believing he was holding back the club. It is worth pointing out that English football, and particularly the English Premier League, has progressively changed since the arrival of Wenger until today, and it's partly due to the contribution of the French manager. The arrival of new investors at clubs such as Chelsea or Manchester City also had a huge effect on the Premier League, as they became huge title contenders. The new investments in English clubs were accompanied by more important players as well as foreign managers with new ideas that led to an increase in competitiveness that ended up affecting Arsenal, who are financially limited to compete on equal terms with the rest. In fact, the Gunners' aspirations was just to reach the top 4 of the Premier League because of the payments they received for playing in the Champions League. We had to be 3 years in the Champions League out of 5 and have an average of 54,000 people, and we didn't know we would be capable of that, clearly stating that the club's sporting priorities had changed and were only a means of raising the money necessary to pay the debt for the club. In 2018, Wenger decided to leave Arsenal, and his replacement was the Spaniard Unai Emery, who had come from 2 seasons coaching Paris Saint-Germain. After a short interim stint with one of the fan favourites, Freddie Ljungberg, the Gunners went for another former club player, Mikel Arteta, who was working as Pep Guardiola's assistant at Manchester City. As has been shown in recent years, Wenger's assistance proved not to be the solution. Arsenal had fallen deeper and deeper into the footballing abyss, failing to qualify for the Champions League in the last couple of years, and the playing styles become more dire. Add to that a board that doesn't show a clear desire to compete and properly back their managers, and you have a club in a perfect storm of chaos and disorganisation. As if the economic situation of Arsenal was not complicated enough, at the beginning of 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic gave another blow to the club, forcing them to request another loan, in this case from the Bank of England, in addition to an additional investment from Kroenke Sports and Entertainment. In addition to this, Arsenal has finished 8th place in the last 2 seasons, the worst position since the 90s. It is the first in which the club has been left out of European competitions. Arsenal's decline is a grand example of what happens when poor timing, poorly managed board, and the growth of competition led to a club that is in a constant state of devolution. It doesn't seem likely that the situation is going to improve. This is Football Forever. Thank you for watching the video. If you like the video, please like and subscribe as it helps my channel to grow. I have more and more videos on the way for all the fans of football.